Cool. All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone, and thanks for coming along to the session. My name is Vish, and I work in the commercial software engineering team at Microsoft, based out of Auckland, New Zealand. So, just a small flight over, and it's sort of awesome to be here. First time speaking at NDC, so it's really cool. A bit about myself. Again, I work out of New Zealand, part of an ANZ team, and been building a lot of bots over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, working with a whole bunch of customers, larger enterprise sort of organizations, maybe sometimes startups as well, whose whole businesses rely on kind of building a single bot, right? So in the mixed scheme of things, it doesn't seem a lot, but if you think about it, it's sort of a kind of newer way of probably reaching out to your users. And so in the next sort of hour, or probably hopefully less than an hour, we'll walk through a few scenarios that are sort of the top sort of trends or top asks from our customers. So the customers that I've been working with, they are thinking about these scenarios quite a lot, and it's sort of one of the most requested scenarios, irrespective of if it's natural language processing, if it's around managing your knowledge bases, and moving ahead from just doing basic FAQ stuff, but thinking about how you can use some of the core services that help you kind of do indexing on larger data sets as well. At the same time, think about how can you implement, things like Backchannel, or things like sort of doing a proper handoff to a human, be it partial or be it complete as well. So hopefully it'll give you a bit of a walkthrough around what's the thinking behind each of these scenarios and whether they fit the requirements that you may have, and also do a bit of a code walkthrough as well as we look into these different scenarios as well. So just before I kind of kick things off and get a bit of sense of what the audience is like. So how many of you have kind of built bots already before coming to this session? Okay, a few of you. And how many of you have built bots on the Microsoft bot framework? Okay, 3 or 4. So again, the content is quite dynamic for me. So what I'll do is I'll kick it off with a little bit of introduction. So the first 10-15 minutes will be a bit of that. So hopefully some of you who've already used the bot framework, it won't be a lot of overlap. So we'll walk through a little bit of that, and then we'll look into some of these more complex scenarios. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to just pop them during the session, or we'll have at least 5 to 10 minutes towards the end as well, or just during the conference, just feel free to ask me anything you want. And what I've done is I've uploaded all the demos and source code up on this link. It's just a GitHub repo. What I'll be doing is I'll be putting all my stuff from Friday's session as well there. So if you want to maybe bookmark it or just star it or whatever, just to keep a track of things, it's a good place to begin with. So yeah, let's kick off with just understanding, how we're changing the dynamics of kind of interacting with applications around us, right? And it's not just about bots in general. It's also about thinking how you're delivering apps through newer form factors like, mixed reality or virtual reality and so forth, right? Where the concept of sort of more personal computing is sort of, is closer to the goal of where it's sort of wanting to be at. And it's more than just being able to understand a conversation. It's about understanding how you can not just process it, analyze it, but also combine it with things like speech analysis, or think about knowledge analysis, or think about just sort of maintaining states across these different interfaces, so that it gives you a much more personalized experience each time you sort of reach out to these web services. We tried that once before as well, and it was a huge success, as most of you would remember it. But the primary reason of us sort of coming to the stage where we're thinking about conversations or bots in general a lot more is because these channels are quite relevant out there. So how many of you in the room use at least 2 of these channels or 2 of these apps? Anyone uses 4? Anyone uses all of them?
What's the second one?
WhatsApp? Anyone uses that, all of them? I was at a conference last week, and I think about 5 people had all those apps and they used them. So clearly they were very social, just not in person. I'm just kidding. But effectively, one of the things is that you've got this ubiquitous sort of operation around being able to communicate with across different channels, but at the same time, what you're noticing is that a certain element of app fatigue is sort of coming into play as well. The name of the outfit is running out of my head, but there's an outfit out in America that sort of did a bit of a survey with a whole bunch of users, and what they found was about 51% of them hadn't downloaded a new app in the last 3 months. and about 30% of them hadn't downloaded a new app in the last 6 months. So if you put that in your context and think about how many useful apps you've downloaded in the last 3 months that you use every day or at least once a week, it's fairly low. So, and the problem is not so much about the apps themselves, and I think searchability is a big factor there as well, and I think that's one thing that we have to solve for bots as well, on how we can kind of reach out or find the latest and the greatest bots that are out there, are sort of helping us do tasks or achieve workflows and stuff. At the same time, you look at sort of how technologies are converging in a way where you've got platforms and tools that sort of help you accelerate the development of and be able to reach your users faster than ever before, especially for bots itself. And a big part of that is how you can kind of easily access, manage, deliver data as well across those platforms. And the way we kind of see it as Microsoft is Conversation as a platform has people being at the heart and center of it, where, irrespective of where you're available or what channel you're on, you have this flexibility of getting that information to you across those channels. We're working with a big customer in New Zealand who's sort of thinking about this as a way of having a conversational interface wherever the user is. So you might get a notification through SMS or through Skype or somewhere else, irrespective of where you are and whatever your preferred channels of communications is. At the same time, you look at digital assistants, which effectively become your new stores that help you a little bit around how you can discover those apps. And of course, bots being kind of the new apps that sort of help you, complete tasks or get the thing done that you're sort of looking to achieve. And this is a typical slide that you will see across our documentation as well, where it's sort of a way of understanding how the framework itself works, right? So towards the right-hand side, you've got the channels. These are not all the channels. There are more channels as well, including the most recent one we announced was Cortana. So effectively, you can kind of use all those channels. And the biggest part, or the biggest reason for us kind of having so many channels or giving you the capability of accessing those is because whenever we built bots for any of our services, we ended up hiring a developer for each of those, or maintaining the web service connection endpoints to each of those channels as well. So effectively, instead of sort of hiring a developer on each of your teams, you've got a bit of a connector service in the middle that sort of manages the connection with each of those canvases themselves. And on top of that, the framework is a little bit, it's quite pluggable as well, where you can sort of use some of the more interesting, cognitive intelligence services like natural language processing or translation or speech services or knowledge services and stuff. So it sort of makes it a lot more easier for your kind of bot to interact with some of those intelligence services that sort of help you have a much better conversation as well. But at the heart and center of it, what you're writing is just a web service. If you're used to writing C# or Node apps or just any other app itself, if you're used to writing any of in web services in each of those languages, it's actually quite easy. So we support .NET, C# and Node through the platform. And again, the community is very strong. So if you go online, I think there's someone built a SDK for PHP, someone's made it for Ruby as well. So if you do a bit of a search, the community is really, really active in that space. And the best part is, since it's a web service, you can connect to any APIs, any internal systems you may have, databases, storage mechanisms, the whole work. So you can actually do everything by yourself. And the best part is the SDKs themselves are fully open source. The GitHub repository is very popular as well. So if you've got issues, the engineering team is constantly looking at that as well. But if I had to summarize everything that I just said in the last sort of 5-7 minutes, the answer to that is just the bots are effectively just apps which are delivering experiences in a different way as opposed to the way we are used to. For some people, bots is all about AI. For some other people, bots are just natural language, or some people feel it's just about messaging, just exchange of messages between the user and whatever your web service is supposed to achieve. And I guess what I'll do is I'll just show you a couple of bots that I use. One of the bots that I use quite regularly, and the other one that I sort of made as a demo for kind of enterprise scenarios. And the one that I'm used to using a lot is called SkyScanner. If you haven't heard of them before, it's just a company based out of the UK. And I use it a lot to sort of just find the best rates that are available online. I might not book through them, but it's a good way of just quickly identifying where you want to fly, what are the price ranges and stuff. So for example, if I'm traveling off to Seattle in a week, I just give it a message over there. And the good thing is that since it's on Skype, I can either wait for a response or I can go off and have a chat with other people as well. And in this case, you can see the use of rich cards as well. So it's not just a text conversation. It's able to detect that it was able to store my state that I am from Auckland. It's got that information in there. It's able to detect that in a week from today means Wednesday, 23rd of August. So I'll set that up in there and I'll say that, hey, I want to come back on the 30th of August. And once I put that information in there, it goes off, does a quick search, just like how a typical website would. But in this case, all the results are available to me right in front of me. And what is good is that the results are a lot more visual, a lot more easier to understand. I can scroll through, I can scroll through the different options that I've got available. And since I'm used to Air New Zealand, I can just click on book. And it will then go off, call the browser for me, and I can complete my transaction from that point on. So everything's filled in for me. If I want, I can use that. If I want, I can completely ignore it as well. So that's how cool that is. Another one that I sort of, so this scenario is more of a consumer-based scenario. But if you think about the way enterprises sort of interact, I built this little demo which is called the Parts Unlimited Sales Assistant. Now this is again available across 2 channels for now. One is through the browser itself, which has just gone postal. There we go. So through Teams, I can just start off by, every time I want to kick off a conversation, I can say, hey, I can say help, or I can directly ask whatever I'm looking for. And it comes back to me with a welcome message saying, hey, this is what I can do. It gives me some interactive buttons to play with as well. Now, let me see what the experience looks like on the browser. Because I've added an extra sort of feature to it as well, where I can perhaps use voice to kind of interact with the bot itself. So I can start off by saying, can you help me prepare? Oh, it didn't recognize that. All right, let's try once more. All right, let me try once more. Can you help me prepare? There we go. So what happened behind the scenes was that it takes my voice sample, sends it off to Bing Speech API, from where it then goes off speech to text, gives the response back, and then posts it back to the user. I think the volume's not working, but the idea is that it sort of grabs whatever text is coming through as well through the voice and then sort of transmits out as well. So it becomes a much more interactive experience as opposed to just text and typing and receiving text responses. So it's a lot more easier that way. And the best part is you can then sort of look in how you can integrate things like using carousels, for example. Maybe if I want to email someone, I can directly click on the hard link. It goes off and kicks off my mail app for me that I can quickly go and fire them an email straight away. So it's actually quite easy to go through this. Cool. So that's a quick intro on what bots are, what some good experiences are, and how you can sort of integrate them into whatever you're building. And with the Microsoft Bot Framework, what we've done is effectively given you this whole capability of using a SDK that sort of helps you along the way of integrating with the platform itself. You can even store a state if you want. We've got a state API built into it, and again, you can use the one that we provide, which is good for dev test scenarios. But if you're going large at scale, then perhaps you can replace it with Redis, replace it with DocumentDB, Cosmos, Mongo, whatever you sort of prefer. And then with the connector service, again, reach the users wherever they are. And one more interesting logo in there is this one over here, which I don't know what it looks like, but it's the logo for Lewis. So it's the Language Understanding Intelligence Service. And the scenario for that is the most typical scenario that that I usually hear a lot is the help desk scenario, which is quite relevant in sort of both the consumer and the sort of enterprise scenarios itself. And the way a typical conversation sort of takes place is where you think about, where do you kick off the conversation with? Maybe you start off with a greeting, and then you kind of complete a transaction to achieve what you're trying to achieve over there. For example, in this case, you start off by greeting the user, and from that point on, you sort of go down further the different sets of dialogue. So depending on the type of prompts you have, you kind of continue to complete your conversation there. So you start off with the greeting, then you use whatever the user types in, as a way of branching into the appropriate dialogue. So for example, if I'm having an issue where I'm not able to, connect to a web page, maybe based on those keywords, I'll go off and either search the knowledge base that I've got, or maybe connect that person with a human who can actually answer that question more appropriately. And similarly, I start off by prompting for a response over there, as you can see. And from there, I grab that information, which in this case was that, hey, I need it working ASAP, which effectively helps us extract that perhaps ASAP means that it's a high priority. So I'll go off and create a new ticket with this number with high priority, and at the end of it, if the user's happy, I can collect the sentiment and store it as well, which helps me kind of retrain my model depending on the responses I get from the user. Or alternatively, if the user's not very happy, maybe I can connect them with a human or something else. And Lewis plays a big part in this. So let's go off and have a look at Lewis. Has anyone used Lewis before in this room? Oh, okay, a few people. I think half of them are just Microsofties, so that doesn't count. But let's quickly switch over to Lewis. So if you haven't heard of Lewis before, Lewis is a great person to know. Helps you, just identify different things that your users are looking for. And to begin with, you've got this little initial dashboard that helps you understand what your users are asking about the most, and you can get into that information as well, which is quite useful to begin with. And then there is this concept of intents. So think of intents as maybe your methods, right? So if I am looking to send a message to someone, send message is probably the method that I'm sort of resorting to. If you look in the help desk scenario, maybe I want to explore the knowledge base, or maybe I'm looking for help. So for help, if I'm writing code, I'll maybe call a method which is called help. Whereas in this case, what I'm doing is I'm just creating those intents based on what the user is trying to achieve. As simple as that, nothing complex there. So I give it a few utterances, and utterances are nothing but just a sentence that sort of explains what I'm trying to do. So if you look at this intent called submit ticket, I can go in there and I can have a look at the different utterances that I've fed into the system, which then goes off and uses that as a way of training the model behind the scenes. What you also see is that a lot of those words are kind of marked by entities as well. So entities are nothing but just parameters or variables within your utterances that help you kind of give a better answer back to the user depending on what they're trying to achieve. So within entities, in this case, what we've got is you can have different types of entities. You can have simple entities, you can have composite, hierarchical, and again, a lot of detail is available in the docs as well. But for now, what I've used is just a list type, a simple list type to narrow down my search or narrow down the cause of an issue. So in this case, I've got a category which has got a few lists. The first one is security, because I've got 4 domains in my IT department: security, networking, software, and hardware. And depending on that, I triage it to a specific department or specific set of people. And I can then give it some synonyms if I want, and that will sort of help me further reroute the sort of problem or the intent that was hit by the user. And if I want, I can extend that functionality by using some of the pre-built domains that we've got there, pre-built intents, pre-built entities, so I don't have to start from scratch. And again, you've got a whole bunch of feature sets as well that I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but effectively the idea is that you can use these features to kind of feed back into the model that's training behind the scenes, so that even though it's not related to anything that's specifically inside your intent or entities, but it sort of helps us kind of classify the intents or the utterances a lot better. I can then go off, do a bit of training, testing, and publish it. And the best part is that it comes off as a web service. So you can literally hit the endpoint with a question. So in this case, I'll just zoom out, go to the address bar, and type in my query, and I'll say, hey, I want to reset my password. And as you can see, I receive a response, which is JSON. And effectively from that point on, I can look at the intent. And in this case, the intent was submit a ticket. I get the confidence behind that intent, or behind the recommendation of that intent. And then from that point on, I can go off and have a look at, hey, looks like people are looking to reset, and it's to do with passwords. And both of them seem to be part of this security entity. So it gives me a way of feeding this information, maybe back to my knowledge-based search, or maybe to a human who can then go off and be very specific in that domain itself. So it's quite useful to kind of filter down results and extract the relevant bits out of it. Freaked me out a bit because the time is incorrect on my laptop. I was like, shit, are we running out of time? No, we're not. Okay. Effectively, so we've seen a quick demo on what that looks like. I think I've just skipped a few slides there. Awesome. So one more demo before we go ahead was around how do we construct, so how do we connect Lewis with our code effectively, right? So if you look at this, for example, I'll just start off with the Lewis demo itself, where what we're doing is we're starting off with the messages controller. So the way, this is just a simple C# project. So how many of you are sort of .NET developers in the room? And Node developers? Okay, just one. Just one, that's fine, that's fine. You made it. That's fine, because half of my demos are .NET and half of them are Node, so hopefully everyone stays excited. All right, so let's begin with .NET itself. So if I show you my Solution Explorer, it's nothing but just a simple web service. So if you've built a web API project before, it's just exactly that. I've got a controller, which is the entry point. In this case, it's the messages controller that the framework hits. And then from that point on, I've got a post method here, which effectively, in this case, is pushing everything that it receives. If it's a message type, first of all, it then pushes it directly to the root dialog. And the root dialog kind of acts like my central point of, routing stuff to different dialogues. So I'll explain that concept in a minute as well. But if I go to my root dialog, what you'll notice is that whenever I receive a message, I might then be forwarding on to Lewis. And the reason why I don't have Lewis on the root dialog is that sometimes when source code gets really large or you have multiple domains, you might want to have Lewis for your root dialog, and then you have your sub-Lewis models for specific domains and stuff. So it becomes quite interesting as you sort of start extending the scope of your bot or your Lewis model itself. And then let's have a look at the Lewis dialog and see what it looks like. So to begin with, you'll notice a couple of things. Again, all the dialogues are serialized, and I'll explain what it means in a little bit as well. But I've given it my Lewis ID, and I've given it the subscription key as well, so that it knows what model to hit. And what is interesting is that whenever I call this class over here, it goes off, makes a call to Lewis, grabs the intents and entities, and depending on what intent I hit on, I then basically route to that method specifically. So in my case, if I was looking to submit a ticket, I would directly come to this intent over here, which then talks to my method over here. So it's just as simple as that, nothing complex here. So let's go off and just try and see if we can run a quick demo. So I just hit run. I think I'm using the wrong endpoint. 7.9, let's do a connect. So there we go. As you can see, I start off with a welcome message as well. And the reason I'm getting a welcome message, which is over here, is because if I go back to my code and head back to the messages controller, you'll notice that below the post method, we've got the system messages. And those are sort of demarked by delete user data, conversation update, and so on. And the way we figure out what it actually is by going inside the emulator. And within the emulator, you'll find this conversation update that was triggered off back to the bot. And in this case, you can clearly see that there was a new member added, which in this case was just my default user, because that's how the emulator sort of classifies users. And then from that point on, I can go off and say that if there's a conversation update, and if there were new members added, which was a real person and not the bot itself, because that's also a conversation update when a bot enters a conversation, I basically go off and send a welcome message saying, hey, I'm your help desk bot, this is what I can do, and I just reply back. That's all I do. So this is a nice way of kind of catching those scenarios as well, and it gives a much nicer experience when you think about the UX side of it. So I can go off and say, hey, maybe I want to reset my password, just the same one as I had on the browser. Reset my password. And so once I do that, I hit the breakpoint, which then transfers me from the root dialog to the Lewis dialog. And if I press run again, as you can see, it goes back and hits the submit method over here. So pretty easy to understand. I want to reset my password. The top intent was submit ticket. It sits here, and then from there on, I can then basically just answer whatever the response I've created there. So if I go back to my emulator, again, this demo was just a demo. We'll go into the complex scenarios in a bit as well. So we've just seen that demo, and let's head off to the slide. So hopefully, as you would have noticed from the demos itself, it's nothing different to the way we've been developing websites or mobile apps and stuff, because effectively you have the root or the home screen, or you have maybe the triage dialog or the search page, and then you have kind of the specific answer that you want to give to your user, or the specific page that you want to serve your user as well. So again, it's quite organic. The skills are completely transferable in the sense of, having dialogues for bots as opposed to screens for your apps. So that's effectively what the reason behind that is. And again, when you think about NLP, just don't overdo it, because if you end up overdoing it, it's really hard to keep track of what your users are actually wanting to get out of the bot itself. And a great place to start for knowledge base kind of scenarios is usually FAQs. So when someone says, hey, I want to reset my password, instead of creating a workflow, which is probably not the best thing because none of those channels are encrypted, none of those conversational canvases or channels are encrypted. So effectively, you don't want to be exchanging passwords and stuff. And to sort of answer that, I'll just show you a quick integration between the Lewis dialog over here and the Q&A maker. So if you haven't heard of Q&A maker, it's a very nice and easy way of kind of using existing FAQ assets, be it on a website, be it on a PDF or Excel or somewhere else, and just pop in the URL and you can get all the information here, which sort of talks to the point that I made initially, how pluggable the whole platform is. You can just plug these bits and pieces of services that sort of make sense for that scenario that you're building, right? So in this case, if I want, I can go off and add new knowledge bases as well. So I can go off and I can just feed in the URL, or I can upload files with question-answer pairs, and it sort of extracts that out for me. In my case, I've got a single question and answer pair just to sort of show the sort of the tech itself. But if I go back to my model here, what you'll notice is that whenever I hit none or an empty intent, I can then basically say that, hey, I don't understand your query, but let me go off and have a look at the knowledge base. And with the help of the Q&A Maker SDK, all I have to do is just feed it the subscription key, the knowledge base ID, and if in case I don't find an answer, this is what it is. And then I can basically sort of suggest these parameters where I can say, I'm just looking for top one answer, and I'm looking for an answer that if the Q&A Maker is 40% confident with that answer, just give it back to the user. If it's less than that, then say, sorry, I couldn't find anything. So that's basically what those two numbers mean at the end. So let's just quickly try run this as well, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. So once I've done that, I just do a quick refresh, and I can say, hey, by the way, who are you? Even though you just said it in the welcome message. I just wanted to try it again, press F5. Oh my God, breakpoints everywhere. There we go. So as you can see, it went off to the knowledge base, and it just grabbed the answer from that Q&A maker. So I didn't do anything fancy there. All it was doing is making a call to the Q&A maker service that I showed you in the previous browser window, and it grabs that out for me. Cool. So let's stop the service and quickly head back to my slides. Awesome. So Q&A Maker is awesome for scenarios where you've got, very specific Q&A pairs. Maybe if you're going up to, say, 5,000 Q&A pairs or 7,000 Q&A pairs, it works awesome with all of that. It does a little bit of NLP on top as well, but not a whole lot. But what if you've got, huge amounts of data, and the data that's not structured? Maybe data is, sitting in PDFs or Word documents and stuff. So how do you manage those scenarios? And if you've got those scenarios available, right, you might want to do a little bit of fuzzy search as well. And then you get into the concepts of how you can guide the user to an answer by filtering down based on specific, maybe structured columns or unstructured information, or just searching across different databases that you've already accumulated data over. And the best part is, maybe sometimes you just want to use natural language. And the easiest way to sort of do it is, or one of the scenarios that I've used is, or that we've used with customers, is to kind of use a combination of Azure Search with any database technology. So you can perhaps use Azure Search, which is search as a service that sits in Azure, but allows you to connect with and index any data store. So it could be a SQL DB. In my case, I've used Cosmos. You could use blob storages for files and Word docs and PDFs and stuff. Or you could perhaps use other storage systems as well. Maybe if your knowledge base is sitting in ServiceNow or sitting in some Dynamics, CRM, Salesforce, wherever else. But to top at that, if you want to reduce the friction to entry, you can use Logic Apps, which has got connectors for Salesforce and Dynamics and stuff, and just make connections from there and quickly search knowledge bases sitting in those CRM systems as well, which makes it a lot more easier to manage. So without further ado, let's look into the next demo. Now again, this demo is based on Node, but again, it should be quite readable. It won't be that bad. Let me head off to this place. Cool. And let me show you my Azure portal. So this is my basic Azure portal where, well, actually my favorite feature is to be able to change the colors of the portal. And I can do it all day. If you haven't tried it before, I recommend you giving it a go. Again, so let's start off with our database itself. So in my case, I've got a Cosmos DB, which has got a bunch of JSON documents, which just over there, Document Explorer. I've just got, I think, about 10, 12 documents to begin with for demo purposes. Let's have it show up. There we go. And again, there's nothing fancy there. It's a little bit, it's got a bit of structure, it's got a title, it's got a category, and it's got a whole bunch of text. One thing that you'll notice is that this text is markdown friendly, so which works really well with the bot framework because the rendering of that is supported through our web chat and stuff that you can easily use. And I think it's supported on most of the channels as well, so it's actually pretty handy. So that's my database, nothing fancy there. And on top of that, I've connected it with Azure Search. And with Azure Search, what I've got is basically an index. Let me see if I can zoom in. All right, let's just zoom in that way. So I've got an index there, which is called Knowledgebase Index, which then opens up here. And I've got a few fields that it's automatically grabbed from the document DB. And what you'll also notice is that for each of those, I guess, fields, if you will, I've kind of selected a few of those parameters, right? So the most important one in my case, for example, was the category, because I just don't want to make it searchable, but I also want to make it facetable as well, where effectively I'm helping the user guide to a result, where sometimes you've got a software issue, but you don't know what it exactly is, so you want to triage through the categories and find out what exactly your problem is, because maybe sometimes the problem with search is that the users don't know how to search, or they don't know what they're looking for. Again, it's a very interesting way of kind of giving it a basic query, a basic index so that can then query over your data. So it's quite handy that way. And the best part is that if I go back to my code and I show you my search client, it's effectively a web service. So all I'm doing in this case is making a call to my Azure Search API endpoint, and I'm just giving it the query, the parameters that are responsible for that. And whenever I receive a result, I just push it back to whoever called that specific function in Node. That's all there is to it. And then from that point on, I can use Lewis to detect if I'm looking to explore knowledge bases, and if I am, I can then find out the categories. I can make a call to the Azure Search client that I've built here as well. So it's quite easy to kind of then have these different modules connect up to the same service itself. So it becomes a lot more easier. So let's have a quick look. Let me just run this code, and let's go to the emulator. And I think this one is running on 7.8. Let's see. There we go. So again, similar experience where I was looking for a conversation update, and whenever there's a conversation update, which means there's a new user added, I then grab that information, and maybe I want to start off by exploring the knowledge base. And as you can see, I've got different, categories, and under each category, I've got a certain, about 3 different resources. And I don't know if you noticed, but for a couple of seconds, there was a typing command as well that was showing up. So that's another interesting way of saying that, hey, user, there's nothing wrong with my service. I am making a call to a web service, so I'll send you a typing instance, which is this one over here. So that it's that easy. It's just as saying session.send typing, and the framework handles it for you. You can go off and grab more details on how to connect to a remote desktop service on Windows 10, and there is all the information. Very easy for me to use. And then again, if you want to take it a bit more further, I can just go off and type. Let me just zoom in. Search about Windows. So what I've done now is I've triggered a function in Node which effectively is looking for search about as the keywords, and I can just give it a name. So again, it's quite transactional. It's not doing any fancy NLP on top, but it sort of is quite common to about the way people sort of talk about when they're looking for specific things in their knowledge base. So the way that works is, for example, if I just do a quick search. No. There we go. So in this method over here, as you can see, I've got this triggered action on this function, which effectively is looking for search about. And whenever it receives that trigger, it then goes off and, first of all, sends off a typing update back to the user. And then from there on, I call my Azure search with whatever the text was after search about. And it does a fuzzy search on top of the Azure search instance that I had in Azure. Does that all make sense? Pretty easy. It's just a couple of lines of code, and that's all there is to it.
Can you make those matches fuzzy? So search about is pretty specific. So is there? Do you have to build it yourself, or can search for, look at, all those things? Is there anything that pulls out those kind of synonym groups?
So again, that's one of the things that you could handle through Lewis as well, where you could say whenever a user says something that's related to that specific thing, it will then over time learn all the different synonyms and stuff as well. In my case, I've kept it quite specific because you could say that's one of the features where this is what I can do, and one of them is search about X, because that's a power user looking for a very specific information. But if you want to make it an easier experience, then you can just use Lewis to kind of find out what the user is actually looking to do. Because that's one more thing that's quite important to think about, and I think that's a great question, because when you're building bots, you have to not just cater to people who are using bots for the first time, which is the most important, but also the power users, because they are looking to get to the answer that they want extremely quickly as well. And the other part is the way you handle, learning for the bot. Again, I like to sometimes call it as supervised learning, but that's not the right term. If you went to the keynote this morning, unsupervised and supervised, don't confuse it with that. It's just a way of sort of learning. It's just a way of sort of helping the bot learn, or maybe just improving something as basic as the search index scores, right? If you're doing indexing and if you want to recommend a search result versus the other, this is a great way of doing it. And the best way to achieve it is, for example, you can have a portal where your internal users can go and test out the bot, or you've got an agent who is looking at all the conversations, but it's not able to, give the best answers to the user. So the agent can go in, step in, and suggest the user what to type. And the way we sort of adapt to that, and again, this is one of the most popular asks from the customers as well, where they're like, how can we have a back-channel communication between the bot and maybe a web interface? It's quite classic when it comes to things like, hey, I am a bank and I have a very secured, authenticated space for my banking information. How can I add a bot there where the user wouldn't have to log into the bot as well separately? Because you just want to do a back channel transfer of tokens between the bot and the website itself. So this stuff becomes quite interesting in that scenario. And I think that's in the, so effectively it's just a way of saying, hey, I am doing something on a website and I want the bot to know about what I'm doing as well, just to get some more context around us. It's quite standard. So let's head back into the code as well and see how we implement that. So what I've done in my case is, I'll just keep this on just to know if things go bad. I'll just keep the inspect element on. But effectively what I've got here is a simple chat window with some recommendations on the web page itself. So what I'll do now is, as you can see, I've got a welcome message there. And in that case, I'll say, hey, my Windows machine is not turning on. Let's just say that. And hopefully what should happen now is, whoops, that's not what I wanted. It's still learning, early days. Okay, so let's try something else. Hey, okay, let's just use one of the sample ones. I cannot print. And what happens now is, hopefully, if this works properly, so what happens now is I've got a back channel set up where whenever the user types anything over here, actually let me just see if I can show you in the code itself, because it makes it a lot more easier to understand what's happening there. So this is under the submit ticket method that I've got, or the function that I've got there. So that's the submit ticket function. And when I scroll down to it, what you'll notice is that before I've even figured out, what the workflow is going to look like, before I even send the users the choice of high, normal, or low, which is what I've just done in the bot over here, for example, it goes off and makes a call to Azure Search again with the specific text of the query to do a bit of a fuzzy search across the whole knowledge base. So that's all it's doing there. And what I can do there is, for example, as a supervisor on top of the bot, or if the bot's having a conversation with a user, I can just go off and perhaps say, actually, for that question, this might be a better answer. And I can click on that, and behind the scenes, my UI or my website itself is connecting back to the bot and giving that answer back to the user. And the way it's doing that is, again, quite simple. It's just a little bit of script here, which effectively is keeping a track of the events that are coming through from the bot itself. So, for example, in this case, what happens is I receive a bunch of search results over here. And what I do then is I kick off an event whenever someone clicks on any of the H3 element tags. And then from there on, I say that basically the user in this case is looking for more details for the specific event which has XYZ heading name or the question name. So that's all there is to it. And then when it comes back to me on the bot side itself, I just go up and fire off an event listener, which is just over here, which effectively is saying, hey, whenever the event name is show details off, which is what I showed you in the previous file, I'll just go off and make a fresh Azure Search query, and I'll filter down the results based on the title, and once I receive a response, I'll just pass it back to the user as text. That's it. So it's literally that. And at the end of it, what I'm doing is I'm just doing bot.send, which is just a way of sending a message to the user without spoiling the stack of it. And the user receives that response, and it's probably a better experience of kind of giving that supervised answers back to the users. So that's how the back channel stuff works. Let's see how much time we've got. Cool. And now I guess the most popular one, which is quite relevant in a lot of scenarios, is how do you hand off to a human, right? And it's quite important for anyone who's doing stuff with consumers, because you want to make sure that you're delivering the best experience possible. Again, if it's an easy way of delivering something, then you can easily use, the bot to answer those questions itself. But when it comes to kind of handling complex scenarios, either you could do what I did in the previous demo by having this back channel support between a portal where the CSR agent can see all the comms that are happening between bots and users, and they can step in whenever they want to, and they can sort of supervise the whole conversation that's happening throughout. Or they could do a proper full, sort of improved escalation path where you could completely hand off to a user, where perhaps you're not happy with the response, or you've got a lower sentiment saying that, hey, it doesn't look like you answered my question properly. So how do you handle that? So in that case, you can actually do a proper handoff to a human who can then go off and start answering questions on the bot's behalf or as the human itself. And again, it's a little bit more complex, and I'll try to spend a couple more minutes on this to explain what it is. But again, the whole thing is documented as well. If you go back to the GitHub side, I'll put a couple of links in there as well that you can sort of read a bit more about it. But effectively, what's happening here is that you've got a provider, which sort of is the one that kind of builds a queue of the users that are waiting for, agents behind the scenes. So if I'm a user, I'm waiting in the queue, the provider maintains the state for it. So in my case, or in my demo, and the stuff that I've published on GitHub as well, it's not persisting that information, but in your case, if you want, you can just sniff out all the information from there, persist it somewhere, and be able to kind of maintain a proper state for the conversation itself. The other one that's quite interesting is sort of the router, which kind of manages the way you communicate between the bot and the user and the agent. So it sort of is the gatekeeper or the middleware that sort of decides which message needs to go to the agent or the user from the bot. So that's sort of the router itself. And command over there, the command sort of control or whatever you want to call it, that's where you sort of handle the interaction between the agent and the bot. And it also gives you a way of kind of intercepting messages from agents and that are going back directly to the user itself. Now, what is also interesting is that the provider over here, it maintains sort of state for the user as well, where it's able to understand if the user is connected to the bot itself, if the user is waiting to get connected to the agent, or if the user is connected to the agent. So that's how it sort of works. So it's sort of maintaining those three states as well. And I'll show you that in the next demo. Cool. So let's go off and have a look at what I've got here. In this case, as sort of remember from the explanation that I was giving you earlier, I've got these three sort of files or functions or whatever you want to call it, which effectively maintains whatever I was talking about in the previous slide. Where if you start off in this case with the router itself, it basically looks at the message and then looks at the type of message. Is this message for an agent, or if it's for the user? Or sorry, if it's from the agent or if it's from the user. And if it is from the user in this case, I'll then go off and look at the function that handles that for me over there. So in this case, I've got route user message, and I'll see if this user is connected to the bot. And if it is connected to the bot, just carry on the conversation as you typically would. If it's waiting for an agent, then you go off and say, hey, I'll try and find you the next available agent. Please wait, and someone will respond to you. You are number X in the row or whatever. And the last one is if it's connected to the agent, then it basically does a send command off to the agent itself, and the text of the message is effectively the text that was sent by the user. Does that all make sense? Cool. Awesome. So once I've done that, and as you can see, I'm maintaining that sort of information there in the router itself. The next one was provider. Now again, I don't want to cover a whole lot of detail in this because again, it's a lot of code that I've already talked about a lot, but effectively this is just a place where it sort of maintains a state of whether the bot is connected to whether the user is connected to the bot, or if it's connected to an agent, or if it's waiting for an agent. And similarly, in the command center itself, this is a great place to kind of maintain or look at how the agent is talking to the user and be able to kind of either kick off the conversation or end the conversation with the human agent. So that's all there is to it. Nothing fancy. Cool. And the way I handle that is, again, back to my app.js. I haven't done a great job of cascading the code down, but it was right at the bottom if I scroll down. So over here, what I'm doing is I'm setting up a router, I'm setting up a command center, and from that point on, I just carry out a conversation by saying, hey, bot framework, or the bot builder SDK, make sure you use these two middlewares as well. And when you do, if the user types something similar to whack agent login, then you trigger the agent login. And if someone if someone as a user wants to connect to an agent, you then trigger that off by sort of doing a handoff to human trigger. And I'll show you that in just a minute, what I mean by that. So let me just, no, come on. I hope this works. All right. Wow. All right. Come on. You can do it. There we go. So meanwhile, my Explorer is having a couple of hiccups. That's fine. There we go. I just wanted to kick off a new session. So let me just restart this, and I think I'm connected over here. So what I'll do is, in this window over here, let me just minimize everything else. I'll carry the conversation out as a user in this window, and I'll wait for the other window to pop up. And in this case, I will, so that was 7.8 as well, connect to that, and I'll act as the human agent over here. So what we'll do now is, so let's carry out the conversation as a user to begin with. And in this case, what I'll say is, hey, I need to maybe reset my password. It's not typing in for some reason. Oh, there you go. It worked. Whoops. So I need to reset my password. It goes off and says, hey, is it a big problem or not? But what I can also do is that I've got the functionality here where I can just type in cancel as well. And when I say cancel, it gives me a prompt saying, hey, do you want to cancel this workflow that you were carrying out? And let me show you what that looks like behind the scenes as well before I actually kick into the other part of the demo, where effectively what I'm doing is when I scroll up to the submit ticket method, I've got this cancel action there for me, which basically looks for the keywords never mind, cancel, or it's just got a basic regex there. And based on that, I can say, hey, are you sure that you want to cancel this current request or current workflow? And the answer is yes. You then just cancel that conversation, and then you start from scratch again. So let me go back and show you. Maybe I want to reset my password, and in this case, I'll type ASAP. So what this will help do is, Lewis behind the scenes is able to understand that, hey, I'm looking to reset my password, which is under security, but because I've got ASAP in there, it sets the priority as high already, because that information is fed to it, and Lewis was able to recognize that information. So I'll say, yep, that sounds good. And it then basically gives me a card saying, awesome, your ticket number is X, and can you give me some feedback? And I'll say, hey, I did not like your response, just because I want to play with it. So it gives me that, and it says, hey, looks like you're not very satisfied. Do you want me to escalate this with an actual person? And you'll say, yes. And then you get a prompt saying, cool, let me connect you with the next available human agent. And on the other chat window, what I'll do is I'll go off and log in as agent, or as a CSR agent, or whoever else. And then it says, hey, looks like there's one person waiting in the queue. And I'll say, cool, let's connect. And then it says that you're connected to the user. On the other hand, it says, hey, you're connected to a human agent now, so let's talk. And it's like, hey, I really want to reset my password. It says, awesome, let's do your reset your password. And I'll say, cool, I've just sent you an email with the details. Cool, so I've done that. It goes off saying that, and the user's like, awesome, thanks. And then I can go back to the agent and say, resume back the conversation between the bot and the user. And there you go. As you can see, I'm back to talking to the bot again. And to do that, I was just using those 3 libraries, which were then basically routing every single message between the human and, the user and the human agent, which I sort of explained in the previous parts. So again, with that, what I've also showed you is the capability of sniffing the text or just reading the text whenever someone sends it to you and doing sentiment analysis on top as well. I don't have a whole heap of time to talk about it, but again, if you go to Cognitive Services, you'll find all that information there as well. Cool. So in summary, right, and again, I understand this is the last session. In summary, what effectively bots are, they're new apps. But they're also a new interface that allow you to be a bit more personal and have a lot more natural interactions with the user themselves. So it gives us a proper way of having conversations with the user where you either, first of all, are meeting the users where they already are, or you're able to sort of give them access to information that feels a lot more natural to communicate with. And again, this sort of becomes the core of architecture as well when you think about it, that I've talked about already. But a couple of takeaways that I sort of would want to, finish with is around how we're changing a little bit around the way we sort of deliver apps today. Think about everything being stateless, because everything that I've done so far, my bot wasn't maintaining any state, and it doesn't have to. And if it needs to maintain a state, maybe it'll store it in some database somewhere. But when you talk about a session, it doesn't care about it, because the whole stack is maintained by the framework itself. Using conversation references and stuff. So you can go further deep into it, but it's really, really interesting the way it's all done. Again, it's scalable, right? It's just a web service that doesn't need to maintain a state for the session, so you can scale it as much as you want. And again, it can become intelligent if you use any of the cognitive services as well. It doesn't have to, but you've got the pluggable option of doing that, and I've shown you that with Q&A Maker, with sentiment analysis as well. And if you want, you can plug in things like vision and stuff as well, or speech even. And what we talked about was doing simple FAQ stuff with Q&A Maker. It's great for prototyping if you've got some ideas and if you want to validate that and see if people are interested in that. It's a great place to start with zero coding effort. If you want to extend that knowledge base and you've got really complex unstructured documents, then Cosmos DB and search is the good way to go. Or just Azure Search in general with any sort of document store. Backchannel is a great way of sort of being able to communicate outside the bot interface, or being able to pass or exchange tokens or events or information between the between the website that perhaps your bot is being hosted on, and the bot itself, without the user kind of having to re-enter that information in your bot itself. And of course, we talked about the handoff to human agents. So it's pretty exciting, the sort of capability and the pluggability of the framework itself. One thing that I did not cover was CI and CD, and the reason I've put it on the slide is because it's just a web service. So there are a whole lot more sessions on that you can go watch. And again, if you think about it as just a web service, all the dev practices remain the same. And again, what we've done is I think the guys in the engineering team have done a really good job of sort of doing an overhaul with the documentation as well. So if you want to learn about doing anything around the stuff that I just demoed, a whole lot of documentation is available there as well. And yeah, so a lot of bot sessions at NDC as well. So I've just done that one over here. But Az and Jordan are doing a session tomorrow. Again, it's a pretty cool scenario that they're working on. I don't want to give away a lot, but if you want to sort of do a further deep dive into a couple of more scenarios, then definitely check out their session. Then Nigel talks about the stuff that he's doing by connecting his personal data and perhaps curing a couple of problems that he had in the past as well, and being able to keep a track of them using bots itself. And lastly, if you want to learn about user experience and how I touched a little bit around how the existing UX practices work with the bot UX itself, then come and join me on Friday again, the last session as well. Apart from that, all the sessions are there, all the resources are there, and with that, thank you very much.